September 12th, 1952. At around 7 p.m., Edward and Fred May, two brothers playing football outside, were shocked when they saw a pulsating, blazing ball of fire streak across the sky, crashing into the hilly woods on a nearby farm owned by G. Bailey Fisher. The boys were shocked by what they had seen and ran to their neighbor's house, Kathleen May, to tell her what had happened. Well, Kathleen had gathered a group of people, including local children Neil Nunley and Ronnie Shaver, and 17-year-old Eugene Lemon and his dog, to all go and investigate the area in question. The entire group mustered the courage to go and check out what had now just crashed into the earth. Could it have been a spaceship, an asteroid? They weren't sure, but they were going to find out. As they made their way up the hill onto the farm, the group was filled with apprehension and fear, not knowing what they would find out there in the dark and eerie woods. They had no idea that what they were about to experience would go down in history as one of the strangest and most frightening things to happen in West Virginia. You won't believe what this group witnessed, which I'll reveal shortly, so stick with me. The entire group reached the top of the thickly wooded hills to see something truly bizarre, something they could have only ever imagined coming out of a science fiction novel, a pulsating red light. And upon gazing at it, the entire group was suddenly overcome by a profound, nauseating stench that, as they described, was metallic. At this point, the dog they had brought with them was freaking out, snarling and barking, but also clearly terrified, with its tail between its legs. All of them were terrified out of their minds, having no idea what lay before them, shining and moving the flashlight rapidly in the dark, searching for whatever it was that lay in front of them. Before they knew it, their flashlights landed on something they all could not explain. They fled for their lives, completely terrified by what they had just witnessed, and as soon as they all get back home, they all experience severe symptoms like swelling of the throat, convulsions, and severe nausea, just to name a few. It was so bad that it had been compared to the symptoms of someone who had encountered mustard gas by a medical professional, specifically one who had examined them. To make matters even more depressing, the dog that had been with them had allegedly begun vomiting uncontrollably and mysteriously dropped dead. And from here on out, Flatwoods, West Virginia was plunged into chaos. Almost immediately the following day, law enforcement was set out to the site of the incident in question, but found no corroborating evidence for anything that was taken down by the entire group of witnesses. Authorities found no trace or any sign at all of a strange pulsating light, nor any sign of the metallic stench, and certainly nothing out of the ordinary. This is what, of course, was put in the newspaper and all the local media. However, it wouldn't be long before other media groups picked up on it, and it was just blown up. Many people started sparking rumors that this was a UFO cover-up and that there were actually skid marks and other strange signs at the landing location of the craft, etc. Apparently, a reporter by the name of A. Lee Stewart Jr. had found a handful of these bits of evidence, including but not limited to strange plastic-like material.
Investigators who went there after sighting stated that there was an unusual smell or odor in that area. And it was said that the trees in the area were singed at the top. There were investigators who said that branches actually were broken.
Now, it wasn't long before it became even more sensationalized, far beyond belief, when others began chiming in that they too saw a strange object streaking across the night sky that same night. And it soon made its way to all the newspapers, and so multiple UFO and paranormal investigators swarmed the area to investigate, including Gray Barker, John Keel, and Ivan T. Sanderson, to name a few. These bizarre accounts started coming out of nowhere into the public eye. One woman in particular had claimed to have seen the same thing this group had just seen a few weeks prior. Another witness stepped forward and claimed that her house had reverberated and had been violently shaken by some mysterious force that same night. Another report had come in from a local couple that were driving down the highway just hours before the event when they all noticed this horrible metallic odor followed by a strong disrupting electrical charge. Right afterward, the couple described what they witnessed, this otherworldly reptilian-looking creature floating across the road before them. But it gets even more bizarre from here. A Mrs. May claimed that the day after this event occurred, she was actually accosted by two mysterious-looking men who claimed they were reporters and asked her to show the site at which this happened. Afterward, these men emerged from the trees with what Mrs. May described as a strange oily substance on their clothing. Even National Guard commander of West Virginia by the name of Dale Leavitt claimed that in the late 1990s, he had thoroughly examined the area with 50 other Air Force personnel and found two strange things. The first being a 6-meter circle of depressed grass and also a strange, mysterious, oily substance. The events of September 12th were not just exclusive to Flatwoods, West Virginia. There were sightings of UFOs in at least 12 other states. Hundreds of reports of unidentified flying objects. Because of this, Ivan T. Sanderson was the one who publicly speculated, due to the numerous other UFO reports, an entire fleet of alien craft might have been passing through. Now, as the years went on, the original witnesses to the event would stick and hold to their story. All had remained adamant about what they had witnessed that evening, and it has now become one of the most famous sightings of the paranormal to date. But what exactly did they see out there? Was it just some UFO craft, perhaps an asteroid, or something far more strange? This will blow your mind. On the night of September 12th, 1952, as the group was investigating what they thought was an asteroid or possibly a UFO crash, their flashlights were met with something bizarre.
Kind of hovering, no legs or prongs sticking down to hold it up, and it moved. We figured about 10 to 12 feet. I've always described it as two like portholes on a boat. I know I was afraid to go outside for a month after that, especially at night.
What they would describe as a shining pair of eyes similar to that of a nocturnal animal. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, this mysterious new being came into view, and they could all make out that they witnessed a massive humanoid figure, roughly 10 feet tall, with what they all described as having a fiery red face and glowing yellow eyes set within. What's even more bizarre is the shape and anatomy of what they saw. Its head seemed to be shaped like a spade, with flickering lights and small clawed hands. The body was black and green and cylindrical. There was also mention of what appeared to be folds similar to draped fabric or even molded metal, all within the mist or fog. You can only imagine the confusion and utter terror the entire group experienced as they laid eyes upon this mysterious entity. However, this entity emitted a bizarre sound within moments. The witnesses described it as something between a hiss and a high-pitched squeal, which then glided right towards them with a throbbing, thumping kind of noise. This sent the witnesses running for their lives and would be the catalyst for all events from here. While the story in question sounds compelling and terrifying, there are several persuasive skeptical arguments that we can look at. The first is that this could be a mixture of misidentification and coincidence. Perhaps that night there was a meteor that could have been mistaken to have crash landed in the wooded hills by eyewitnesses. Many of them who claimed to have seen the light in the sky described it as a meteor, not a UFO. I mean, it's possible that in this hysteria they would jump to conclusions and connected the two. As this small group went to investigate the dark hills, the ominous foggy atmosphere made it the perfect setting for a misidentification. They possibly witnessed one of the 3 aircraft warning hazard beacons that are completely visible up on that hill, and in conjunction with the meteor, assumed it was a UFO. Even the entity they claimed to have seen might just be a misidentification of a large barn owl perched high up on a tree, hopped up on adrenaline, spooked, and going in with a preconceived notion that they were about to stumble upon something from outer space. The witnesses may misidentify the owl and the perch it was on as one singular entity. I mean, visibility was already poor with the fog, and it all seems like the perfect setup for a horror movie scene. It's easy for the human mind to set ourselves up for something we don't actually see. Then the owl, startled by the witnesses, witnesses flew off right past them in the night, letting out a distinctive shrill cry. This is supposedly what the witnesses had mistaken as an alien entity flying at them. I mean, many of the features that a barn owl has does coincide with the eyewitness descriptions of the entity. There are similarities, and it is a possibility. Now, I'm not stating that this is precisely what happened, I'm just saying it's a possibility. But what about the strange oily residue and track marks that were found? Is it possible that a tractor in the area around the time of the sighting left it behind? Perhaps the oily substance leaked from said tractor. Even the foul odor had been written off as the smell of a specific kind of grass native to this area.
People talked about, oh, maybe it was a possum, maybe it was a buck deer, and so forth. They're just responding to the shining eyes.
Nichol believes that what the witnesses saw was distorted by their emotional state.
If you've got a mindset, if you're expecting to see something, that will affect what you see. When they see something then that's frightening, some shining eyes, that quick comes at them. I don't think they had time to think, but simply to react.
Skeptic Joel Nichol wrote a complete deconstruction of the case for the Skeptical Inquirer. It was so well written that many Fortean researchers agree and have concluded that this is more than likely what happened. Part of what I had mentioned was actually taken from the same article, about the meteor, the owl, etc., and it is worth reading the whole thing below. Another big issue that skeptics have with this story is the descriptions given by the various witnesses. What they describe seems to indicate something mechanical by nature rather than some sort of horrifying extraterrestrial entity. For example, Gray Barker, who is also noted at the time as the occasional prankster, claimed that having visited the area in question only 30 minutes after the initial encounter by the group, he only found an empty, quiet forest with no signs or evidence of anything out of the ordinary ever happened. Of course, even Ivan Sanderson's reputation was being critiqued at the time, considering he was allegedly claiming that there were these large three-toed prints found along a beach, supposedly belonging to a giant penguin species. Even the supposed fleet of UFO crafts seen in other states were written off casually for being constituents of an annual meteor shower, which, you guessed it, occur in early September. But this isn't a case of a story presented and concluded falsely. Some of the eyewitness descriptions of the illuminations change. There was a farmer on an adjacent hill a few miles away from where the encounter happened, and he claimed that he observed a brightly lit spot on the hill for an extended period. This farmer grew gravely concerned that a forest fire had happened and was watching intently for several minutes with a pair of binoculars until the area vanished into a single point of light. In recent years, paranormal researcher and writer Nick Redfern has proposed something very interesting. In 2010, Redfern received a special declassified RAND publication titled The Exploitation of Superstitions for Purposes of Psychological Warfare, written by Gene M. Hungerford for the U.S. Air Force from April 14th, 1950. Now, this document is 37 pages long and dives into strange theories, practices, and ideas. However, the icing on the cake was a section of this document that quoted directly from a book by a man named Jasper Maskelyne titled Magic, Top Secret. Jasper was a famous magician at the time in the 30s and 40s. Quoted from the book in this report, which leads those to believe that a psyops was occurring during World War II, read this: "Our men were able to use illusions of an amusing nature in the Italian mountains, especially when operating in small groups as advance patrols scouting out the way for our general moves forward. In one area, in particular, they used a device that was little more than a gigantic scarecrow, about 12 feet high, and able to stagger forward under its power and emit frightful flashes and bangs. This thing scared several Italian Sicilian villages, appearing in the dawn, thumping its deafening way down their streets with great electric blue sparks jumping from it, and the inhabitants, who were mostly illiterate peasants, simply took to their heels for the next village, swearing that the devil was marching ahead of the invading English. Like all tales spread among uneducated folk, and helped no doubt by our agents, this story assumed almost unimaginable proportions. Villages on the route of our advance began to refuse sullenly to help the retreating Germans and to take sabotage against them. And then, instead of waiting for our troops to arrive with food and congratulations at their help, the poor people fled, thus congesting the roads along which German motorized transport was struggling to retire. The German tankmen sometimes cut through the refugee, and this inflamed feelings still more, and what began almost as a joke was soon a sharp weapon in our hands, which punished the Germans severely, if indirectly, for several critical weeks. A few things to note. The first is that the height of the Flatwoods monster and this makeshift scarecrow were about the same, roughly 12 feet. This scarecrow entity was also said to emit bright lights and other visual effects and noises. Even the 12-foot scarecrow in Italy gave off frightful flashes and bangs and had great electric blue sparks jumping from it. Also, this report refers to this Italian event that Jasper described in his book and was believed to be used to prepare for PSYOP campaigns in the US Air Force at future times. It was even noted that the Air Force took a particular interest in the Flatwoods monster reporting by the media. The report was submitted to the United States Air Force in April of 1950, 2 years before the Flatwoods event. This led many to speculate that in these 2 years, the US military devised their version of a 12-foot tall scarecrow-like entity to emit these loud, horrendous noises and other various light and visual effects. The desired results would be to confuse and or frighten the enemy. If this is correct and they nailed the timing right, they could test this during the perfect time when no one would suspect it. The annual Pisces meteor shower, or so I believe it's Pisces. No one would suspect a thing. Another very interesting perspective is that British forces focused on testing this on small, isolated Italian villages. Flatwoods is a small rural town and has roughly 350 people living in it, give or take. I find this to be a fascinating take on the matter. However, despite all the speculation and accusations of the entire event being a hoax, one thing that I find exceptionally strange is the reported sickness, fainting, and other psychological effects that a medical doctor noted. Surely, if the entire thing was a figment of their imaginations, then why was it written down that they had come across what the doctor was convinced was mustard gas? I mean, sure, you can even write off that the dog had passed away just as a coincidence in time and that it had a mysterious unknown illness, but it sure matches up well with what the other witnesses experienced regarding their symptoms. While the case was incredibly sensationalized by the media at the time and even had specific details dramatically embellished in countless articles, books, and other outlets, there is still a wide array of researchers and enthusiasts who claim that this case is far from solved. This is due to several aspects that don't fit within the skeptical view of the story. A perfect example is that the meteor that multiple people witnessed was all noted as having a pulsing quality. Even the eyewitnesses to this day maintain their stance that what they saw was not an owl, but what is already documented. You should remember that there are many angles, arguments, and counter-arguments that relate to this case. It would be virtually impossible to cover everything and not have the video over an hour long, so I wanted to give you all a neat, entertaining, and summarized version of the who, what, when, where, and why. Many speculate that the Flatwoods monster was a part of something much bigger, Project Blue Book. Now, Project Blue Book was the code name for the study of UFOs by the United States Air Force from 1952 to 1969 when it was stopped. Now, this is separate from the show on the History Channel bearing the same name. Regardless of whether this story is partly due to misidentification or overactive imaginations, or if this is truly something in the realm of the supernatural, extraterrestrial, with the media and the government covering it up, the answer, the truth, what we all want to know, what really happened that night, will continue to remain a mystery. In fact, one of the most interesting aspects of the entire Flatwood phenomena is that it was a one-time show. It was never seen, heard of, or reported on again. But it doesn't end there, because unlike Bigfoot, Mothman, or Dogman, to name a few, which have all been reported on multiple times, there are entities that have only ever been reported on once. 1956, a man by the name of John Hanks was out late one night when he came face to face with something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. What he saw that night was like nothing he had ever seen before. A 9-foot tall creature with 15-foot wings standing before him, its wings adorned with multicolored lights, illuminating the shiny metallic material they were made of. The creature emitted a haunting hiss that sent chills up and down Hank's spine, but it was the creature's face that truly terrified him. Its large, watery eyes stared at him with unadulterated malevolence, and its skin was brown and battered like leather. Hanks speculated that this creature was something from the depths of hell. He noticed that there was some sort of panel in the middle of its chest, which he believed was a control mechanism for managing its flight. But just as quickly as the creature had appeared, it took off and disappeared into the night sky. The experience had left Hanks traumatized and terrified. He could not shake the image of that monstrous creature from his mind. His case was investigated by Ken Gerhard, an expert of flying humanoid encounters, who was astounded by Hank's story. I had the chance to personally meet Ken back in August, and he seems like a pretty swell dude. I think the fact that he chose to investigate this specific story does kind of help add some authenticity to it, because he clearly saw that there was something there. November 17th, 1958. 2 members of the British Territorial Army were dispatched to the wilds of Scotland near Balmoral Castle for a weekend training exercise. Little did they know what would unfold would be far beyond any training exercise they had ever faced or had been prepped for. The 2 soldiers were tasked with guarding a small hilltop as part of their duties, and they began digging a trench for cover, and in the early morning hours, they heard a strange gurgling sound coming from a nearby group of trees. Well, curiosity got the best of them, and they set out to investigate. But what they found was beyond anything they could have ever imagined. 2 massive figures with glowing green eyes and fiery red mouths emerged from the shadows and approached them. The creatures were over 7 feet tall, and the soldiers were frozen in terror. They quickly retreated, hearing a swishing noise behind them, and as they looked back, they saw a gigantic disc-shaped object in the sky, pulsating and following them. Then, the object disappeared, leaving a shower of sparks in its wake. The soldiers knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, but chose not to tell their officer in charge. The encounter left them shaken and terrified, wondering what else was out there in the dark wilds of Scotland. October 10th, 1973. It was a night that would forever be etched in the minds of 2 Mississippi fishermen, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker.
Last October, in the quiet Mississippi town of Pascagoula, 2 local men confronted authorities with a rather bizarre story.
The 2 men were fishing on the banks of the Pascagoula River when they noticed a strange light in the distance. Little did they know that what would happen would be far beyond anything they could comprehend. They saw a brightly lit, egg-shaped craft emitting a deep, throbbing hum as light approached. The intensity of the hum made both men feel extremely nauseous and sick, and then, as they watched in horror, a hatch opened and 3 strange-looking creatures floated out of the craft, heading straight toward them. These were no ordinary aliens. They were humanoid with mask-like faces and 3 carrot-style points protruding from their heads. And to make matters more terrifying, they had large hands like a lobster or a large crab. Before they knew it, these beings had seized both men and manhandled them onto the UFO. The experience was like being reduced to lab rats. The men were paralyzed with fear and could do nothing to resist. Finally, after being subjected to a series of experiments, the men were dumped back on the river's edge. Hickson and Parker were left traumatized by this experience.
Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker told of a strange craft landing near their fishing site and of being taken aboard by 3 unearthly creatures. The 2 men were questioned under hypnosis and lie detectors, but their story remained intact. One of the men suffered a nervous breakdown and is still under treatment.
It was the most shock I've ever had in my life.
What did you see?
They were shorter than me. I'd say about 5'2" or 3", and they didn't have a neck. It seemed to come directly to their shoulder, and it had something that came out to a point about where a nose would be, and on each side the ears. And I believe
they had encountered something beyond their comprehension from another world. And the fact that the creatures had never been seen before or since only added to the mystery and terror of their encounter. Lastly, November 9th, 1979, Robert Taylor, a forestry worker in Scotland, was carrying out his routine patrols of the woodland area when he stumbled upon something that would forever change his life. He made his way through the trees, his dog Laura running happily at his side, and he suddenly found himself standing just feet away from a strange dome-shaped object. It was dull gray and metallic, about 20 feet wide, and eerily silent. Taylor was frozen in fear as he realized he was face to face that was completely not of this world. And suddenly, a pair of spherical, spiky objects emerged from the craft and surrounded Taylor. He was hit with a noxious gas that caused him to pass out, and when he awoke, the objects that had sprayed him with gas and the craft were gone. Robert had no idea what had happened to him or why he had been targeted, but the encounter didn't end there, because after the incident, Taylor experienced a host of strange symptoms such as persistent headaches and a metallic, strange taste in his mouth. He also discovered unusual marks all over his skin that he just could not explain. Despite his confusion and terror, Taylor remained convinced that what he had seen was real. The encounter was actually investigated by UFO researchers and became one of the most famous and puzzling UFO cases in Scotland of all time. His symptoms are even similar to that of the Flatwoods monster story. Okay, so we've looked at a lot of stories today. What's the general consensus here? Like the Flatwoods monster, the entities in question in these other stories were only ever publicly reported on once. Now, why is that? Were there other sightings that just never made it public, or are we dealing with manufactured encounter stories? Going back for a moment, while there is strong arguments against the Flatwood monster story, the arguments don't fill in every hole of the story. In fact, there are many counter arguments that I didn't go into in this video that you can spend, multiple videos going over, from a hoax to a covered up conspiracy by the military to a genuine alien encounter. The conclusion here is that the entire legend remains a mystery as to what happened that night. But more importantly, I want to hear from all of you. Is the Flatwoods monster an elaborate hoax? Was it a psyops test on the American public by the United States Air Force utilizing their own scarecrow? Or was this a genuine encounter with a terrifying otherworldly entity we would never see again? You decide. And if you guys enjoyed today's episode, be sure to go ahead and smack that like and subscribe button for more content just like this, because I release videos of the storytelling of the mysterious and supernatural. As always, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll catch you all in the very next episode.